Hi, it's Keith, it's Plugged On, and I'm bringing you another ranking video. This time it's only me, because I'm going to rank the 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. I've kind of, came in towards the end of watching the show, kind of really binge watched the first 6 seasons, like right towards the tail end of season 6 of Game of Thrones. So it's fresh in my mind. So that's why we kind of figured I should be the one to do this. So yeah, I'm gonna put the 7 seasons of Game of Thrones in an order. This is my opinion. My opinion is put however much stock in my opinion as you wish. Also, isn't anybody else's on the channel's opinion, but yeah, because I think a couple of my choices on where I put some seasons might aggravate some people. But I mean, this is my opinion. So let's get right into it. At number 7, season 5. I feel as though season 5 kind of has to be towards the bottom, just because there was a lot of cool things that could have been done that didn't go well. I think the only storylines that kind of do like great or all right. So Jon's storyline's really good. I feel like honestly Jon's storyline in season 5 might be one of his better arcs of the entire show, and I mean it also includes one of the best, probably the best episode of the show, which is Hard Home. This season actually has 2 of them, because I would actually put Dance of Dragons, Fly with Flying Hair, pretty far up there too. So, but like, yeah, his storyline's really good. And I mean, full spoilers for the seasons in case you didn't know this. But like again, and it ends in his death and ends in an interesting cliffhanger. I feel as though Arya's storyline's pretty okay. I don't think they were kind of heading in the right direction, but they hadn't ruined it yet. In some ways, they haven't ruined her character arcs like they kind of have in other seasons, but her storyline was okay. But then for the most part, and then I think the stuff that happens in Winterfell, even though there's some questions as to why they went the route with, like, I mean, because the scene with Ramsay raping Sansa is a little hard to watch, but it was again a good Theon like redemption story arc this season, which was pretty cool. But everything else kind of falls flat. Like the stuff in Dorne just doesn't work, and it just kind of, it's the most boring stuff to watch in the show. The stuff that happens with Dany and Meereen is interesting, but I feel as though a lot of it is like, why haven't you gone to Westeros? You've freed. Why is this still going on? You freed Slaver's Bay. Why is this still going on? Again, the stuff in King's Landing is interesting, but it kind of starts to get a little long in the tooth, because especially when you consider that a lot of these storylines continue on into season 6. But like the Walk of Shame was a good moment, and it's like I feel like that is the problem with this season, because honestly I think that this season 5 and then my number 6, which I'll get to in a second, I feel like they could get flip-flop back and forth, because season 5 does have some good merits to it. I mean, it brings Tyrion and Dany together, bringing 2 of the main characters together. I mean, Jon Snow's death and Hard Home were big moments. And it also seems like, for a lot of ways, season 5 is like the beginning of the end. Now Jon is focusing on the White Walkers. Now, you see more of Cersei's mad dash for power. You see Arya kind of taking her life into her own hands. This kind of seems, it's very much like the beginning of the end. And I feel like that's part of the reason why the season suffers, because it kind of has to start this new overall arc of where the show is going, this new direction, but then it also has to follow up season 4, which is a phenomenal season. So I just think, yeah, season 5 is a little rough at times. But number 6, I have season 2. So I know a lot of people actually like season 2, and I'll probably, when I get to season 3, a little bit higher up on my list, I'll probably say this again. I feel that, like, one good moment does not a good season make. So yes, the Battle of the Blackwater was a cool moment, and it was a great thing. But I feel like the problems with season 2 are 2 things, which is A, season 2 doesn't exist well by itself, in the sense that a lot of storylines seem like they're just setting up the next storyline. To me, the events in Karth don't really matter that much in the long run. We don't really return, and like, it's not like this big thing that's like they keep coming back to, like stuff that happens in Karth. I mean, Jon's storyline is cool, where he gets, captured by wildlings and he kind of becomes integrated into their ranks. That's cool, but again, it's like sets up his arc for the next season. Same thing with Robb and Catelyn. Their arcs kind of set up stuff for the next season. Jaime doesn't really do anything. I mean, he's kind of just a prisoner the whole season. Characters like Renly, who's a part of season 1, he just kind of dies, and it's like, yeah, Renly, he's dead. But the only thing that Renly's important to anymore is the fact that that he's the reason that Brienne wants to kill Stannis, and that's it. I just feel as though, season 2 just doesn't exist well on its own. Everything's setting up something else. Yet at the same time, season 2, a lot of the events of season 2, I just feel like don't matter in the long run. Their events have effects that go on into seasons 3 and even seasons 4 and up to season 5. Their events have impacts all the way up to maybe season 5. But at the same time, I just feel as though it just doesn't matter. Theon's story where he takes Winterfell is pretty alright, because that's kind of especially now with hindsight, that's the beginning of his redemption arc. So they kind of paint him as a bad guy, but then they kind of start then they turn him into a sympathetic character and kind of making him, giving him a better arc. Bran's story with Osha and Rickon and everybody else, yeah, that story's okay. It's that's my whole thing with season 2, is that a lot of the stuff is okay. And some of the changes, again, this is where some changes take place in the books, where they have Talisa instead of Jean Westerling, and it's and then, again, spoilers, Talisa ends up dying in the Red Wedding, and it's so why change the character? What was the point in changing the character if you were just going to kill her off anyway? Because Jean Westerling survives the Red Wedding in the books. So, I don't know. I just feel as though season 2 has a bit of a harder time stacking up to other seasons in the long run. Now, there's cool moments, that's where Wildfire is introduced, which becomes important in season 6, and you start to see the depth of Cersei's hatred for her brother, and it's the introduction of the Faceless Men, so that Arya can eventually go and try to learn with them. So again, there are some cool things that set up arcs, but it's it's the beginning of an arc, and in a lot of ways, usually the first installment of an arc or trilogies and things like that, it doesn't work well. To me, at least. So number 5, I have season 6. Season 6 had another hard place. Season 6 basically had to both clean up the loose ends from season 5, but then also set up season 7. Which is a hard thing to do. So, and I feel like they do a decent job most of the time. The stuff in Marine and stuff with Dany, I do feel does maybe drag a little bit in season 6, but it does end very well with Dany riding Drogon and the Dothraki coming and destroying and defeating the Sons of the Harpy. That was a cool moment, but that storyline does seem to drag a little bit. Same kind of thing with the Cersei versus the Faith Militant in King's Landing. That stuff, it kind of seemed to drag on, but I mean the ending with the finale where she blows up the Sept of Baelor. That was a huge payoff, and that makes it feel worth it. I'm glad that they resolved all the stuff in Dorne really quick, and then it just, okay, we're not even going to bother with that stuff anymore. That was good. I felt like Sansa and Jon's quest to kill Ramsay and to take back Winterfell was done very well. I feel like that was a good payoff to all those storylines. The only spots where I feel like this season suffers really is in Arya's storyline, in which the way that Arya's storyline ends just kind of makes it seem as though the whole arc that started in season 5 and ended in season 6 just wasn't worth it. She just didn't become a Faceless Man. She just all of a sudden was yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. And the same kind of thing with Bran. Bran and Mira and Hodor disappeared, and they at the end of season 4 they kind of just did their thing, and they weren't in season 5 at all. And then and again, their storyline just seemed kind of rushed a little bit. That's one of the storylines that I feel like is kind of rushed this season. And I mean, and Bran's story is really only important for that revelation that Jon is the son that Jon's mother is Lyanna Stark, and is the son of Rhaegar. That's really what Bran's story is introduced for. And I get that some people have a problem with season 6 because season 6 the pace starts to pick up, but at the same time I can kind of understand that. that was very much at the point where we realized, hey, the end is near. The show is going to be done here soon. So, and I think the increased pace is also because, like, well, a lot of storylines are getting resolved. I mean, the Boltons and the stuff, and a lot of then that conflict is resolved. Arya's stuff with the Faceless Men gets resolved. Like, a lot of storylines just get resolved, and so because they're moving like that, things are moving faster because everything's moving towards the eventual point of where the storylines are going to converge, which is obviously going to happen in season 8. So, like, the whole increased pacing, I don't mind, especially when you look at season 5 and in my opinion also season 2, where things just seem to drag on and on and on and on. Like, that's the main problem with season 5, is that, like, things just drag on, and it just seems like there isn't much of a payoff then. At number 4, I have season 3. I know that's going to probably, a lot of people have season 3 at like number 2. And granted, I get it. The Red Wedding is a big moment. The Red Wedding is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest moment of the whole show. But I think it is more of an issue of, again, one moment does not a good season make. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of great moments in this season. All the stuff with Jaime and Brienne is really cool. Like, they're building their relationship and learning more about Jaime as a character, and painting him more in a good light. That's great. Arya and Sansa, not Arya, God, Arya and the Hound's story is pretty good, and how, like, they're kind of opposites and an opposite kind of people at this point in the show, and I felt like that was very good. And I mean, of course, Rob's storyline is really good, but then the Red Wedding kind of makes everything else that happens to Rob and his family kind of pale in comparison for the whole season. And then I liked Dany taking charge in Essos, and she goes to Astapor, and she gets the Unsullied, and she takes Yunkai and things like that. There's a lot of big moments, and Jon and Ygritte getting together, and then eventually Jon leaving the Wildlings to return to the Night's Watch. There's a lot of big moments, but again, it kind of falls into like a thing of, yeah, these storylines are setting up for things that are going to get continued in the next season, especially like Arya and the Hound's journey is going to basically continue into the next season. A lot of the stuff that happens in King's Landing just gets continued on into next season. I literally just had it. Another storyline. Dany's storyline is just going to continue on to the next season. Jon's storyline is just a setup for what happens in next season. So season 3 is really good, and I do really like season 3. It's just that, like, season 3, again, I feel like the Red Wedding is such a big moment that it overshadows everything else, and it kind of makes everything else pale in comparison. It's kind of like that thing where there's one really good song on an album, and that makes the album look really good, but then if you kind of take away that song, you look at the rest of the album, it's like, yeah, this is pretty good, but it's not the best. So this is the one that might make people mad the most. At number 3, I have season 7. So now, I've said this a couple times, and when we've talked about season 7 of Game of Thrones on the weekly breakdown and in the 2 reviews we put up, I actually really like season 7. And I know the pacing of season 7 is something that a lot of people have a problem with. And granted, I will admit, maybe if somehow HBO could have put 10 episodes. If they would have had 10 episodes, I feel like we wouldn't have any problems with season 7. It probably still would have moved fairly quickly, but we could have gotten some of these more moments and spent stuff. But I feel like it kind of needed to happen. Again, everything is converging to where the story is going. You have great resolutions to some storylines, and just big payoffs for things that we've been waiting seasons on. Jon and Dany finally meeting, and then eventually, them getting together. That's been something that's been brewing for forever. And if you hear George R.R. Martin talk, that's the whole point of the show. In the 3rd episode, you get the resolutions to, the stuff with the Tyrells and Olenna telling Jaime that she killed Joffrey, and then the same kind of thing with Cersei taking revenge on Ellaria Sand and Tyene Sand, and just getting her revenge for the death of her daughter. Like, those are all really cool moments. And then sort of in some ways the pinnacle moment for Theon as a character, when he finally decides that when he kind of solves his identity crisis, and he's like, I need to be brave, I need to do the right thing. And there's a lot of moments like that. Tyrion and Cersei finally meeting face to face for the first time. in over 20 episodes. That's great stuff. That's all great stuff. And I know that like a lot of people have problems with it because it cries of fan service and things moving quickly. But again, I mean, production things wise, I think that things moved nicely. I mean, again, things are going to move a lot quicker because there's less storylines. Like, I mean, essentially for a lot of the story, there was the stuff happening in King's Landing, the stuff happening in Winterfell, and then the stuff happening at Dragonstone. And that's essentially, those are the three storylines of like the whole season. And which there's kind of a couple moments of seeing a couple characters here and there in other spots. But that's the story. That's what's happening in this season. So I think that, and now everything's converging to be about the Great War and taking on the White Walkers. And I know some people are like, yeah, things just kind of happen. But I think when you look at the brilliance of the one thing, and I wanted to mention this on the breakdown a couple weeks back, but I forgot. When you look at the details, people are like, oh yeah, there's just a lot of things that just kind of happen with the whole quest beyond the wall. But it's very, at least to me, it's very much looks like it was a trap for the Night King to get a dragon. I mean, when the Fellowship, the Fellowship, if you want to call them that, encounter a small, manageable group of undead to fight so that they can capture one. Then, despite probably having the means to, maybe with like, I don't know if they have arrows or those ice spears that the White Walkers have or things like that, the Army of the Dead is content to just stand there and not attack Jon and his crew. And then when Dany does show up, he has 3 ice spears, the perfect number for Dany's 3 dragons. And then it just so happens that, he has chains, which sure, maybe the thing, where did he get the chains from? But maybe he had them because he planned this to happen, to steal a dragon, because then he uses the dragon to bring down the wall. In some ways, I feel like there's a subtlety that some people are missing out on. And again, I really like Season 7, and especially because we're getting close to the end, and there's all the hype in the world behind it. So I really like Season 7. And I know, granted, I will say maybe some moments are fan service. Arya running into Nymeria, that's a bit of fan service. The bringing back the white polar bear, that's a bit of fan service. But in some ways, those are moments that people have been asking for a while anyway. So why not? All right. Number 2, I have Season 1. I think Season 1 is great because in some ways the lasting effects of the characters in Season 1 are still felt to this day. I mean, Ned Stark's death is still like the catalyst for, and all the stuff involving whether or not the Baratheon children are actually Robert's, that's still being felt now. You know what I mean? Like, it's still all the stuff, and there's a lot of great character moments that like kind of get to matter early on. Again, we get to meet Ned, who's essentially Jon Snow before Jon Snow really took off as a character. And you have Viserys, who kind of also is helpful in making Dany the character she is. You have Khal Drogo, who's also very helpful in making Dany the character that she is. You have Robert Baratheon, whom is, again, like a lot of characters and situations that set up everything else so nicely. And I just really like Season 1. It feels like a completely different show. And like when I talk about seasons that exist well on their own, Season 1 of Game of Thrones exists very, very well on their own. Like, just think about it. There's, with the exception of the opening screen, there's no White Walkers or undead. There's no dragons until the very end. There's no all these wars and plots, and it's a much more intimate thing. Like, one of the things that happened that I think is part of the reason I don't like Season 2 as much is Season 2 introduced so many new characters, and it's like, here's this character, we're gonna spend a lot more time with this character, and a lot more time with this character, and this character, and this character, and here we're gonna introduce this character. Oh yeah, and then here's a couple other characters that are actually really big. And then Season 1's like, yeah, here's the Lannisters, here's the Lannisters, and what's happening in King's Landing. Here's the Starks, and what's happening in Winterfell, and yeah, that's really all that matters. There's like maybe a dozen or so characters that are actually important that you actually have to follow all the time. And a lot of the seeds, again, for moments later in the season, Littlefinger betraying Ned Stark is a big moment that's going to have lasting impacts. Joffrey, again, killing the Starks are moments that are going to have lasting impacts. I just feel as though Season 1 is is so well done. And granted, it's very close to what happens in the books, but I think that's a good thing. Like, there's everything has such a lasting like impact on what's gonna happen, and I really like season 1. I mean, because you have like Sean Bean, who's still on the show, and like Jason Momoa as Khal Drogo. Again, these characters whom have been dead for forever, but they're still some of the best characters ever. And it's also like shows the writing. You can create a character like Khal Drogo who's just a manly brute, but then you can make him sympathetic. So I just think season 1 is something special, and that's why I really like it. And then number 1, it has to be season 4. Season 4 is in a lot of ways symbolically the end of one arc and the beginning of another. In a lot of ways for Game of Thrones, because much of the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, Joffrey's king. There's the fear of a wildling attack on the wall. Dany's trying to clear out the slavery in Essos, around Slaver's Bay. Arya is trying to make her way to family and whatnot, trying to get away and get back to her family. There's a lot of stuff like that, and I just feel like it's the end of everything up until that point. Now after that, everything moves towards we're gonna fight the White Walkers, and now Arya is starting to become a faceless man. And this is kind of the season where I honestly start to feel a lot more for characters. This is the season where I really start to like the Hound as a character. It's where I actually start to like Sansa as a character. I could not stand Sansa in the first 3 seasons. Same thing with Jaime. I kind of started to like Jaime a little bit in season 3, but season 4 is where I really start to like Jaime as a character. And you start to really see the depth of Littlefinger and how far Littlefinger and how his machinations go. And I think honestly the best part is the whole thing with Joffrey's death and the trial of Tyrion. Like, that's like the best part of some of the best arcs of the whole show, because you get to see how far Cersei and Tywin are willing to go to kill Tyrion. And you also see Shay's betrayal despite him trying to spare her because he actually loves her. And it kind of paints, again, some of the events that happen. Tyrion probably doesn't believe in love anymore. And then again in season 7, seeing that Jon and Dany are falling into bed together, that's probably not going to, he probably sees that that's not going to end well. I just think that there's a lot with season 4 that just works. That just works so well. I mean, it's the aftermath of the Red Wedding. It's where you really start to see the Tyrells and how the Tyrells are moving things and positioning themselves to kind of take power. But Stannis' storyline is still kind of meh. Like in season 3, he doesn't really do much and things like that. But I just feel as though just about all of the show is hitting on all cylinders when it comes to season 4. And in my opinion, that's why season 4 is the best. Now, who knows? Since season 8 is the last season, and that we apparently could get anywhere from 9 to 12 hours of Game of Thrones in those 6 episodes, I think season 8 could potentially sit high up on my list too. So yeah, so that was me ranking the 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. Let me know, let us know your list by putting your list down on the bottom. And yeah, thank you for watching. There's a couple more lists like this that we're planning on doing. A couple more bands, a couple other TV shows and stuff that we want to do here at some point. But yep, thank you for watching. See you later.